Scripture reading today will be from Matthew chapter 7. We'll start in verse 21. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, shall enter the kingdom of heaven, but he who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, cast out demons in your name, and done many wonders in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you who practice lawlessness. Therefore, whoever hears these things of mine and does them, I will liken him to the wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain descended, the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on the house. And it did not fall, for it was founded on the rock. Now everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does not do them will be like the foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, and it fell, and great was its fall. You may be seated.
So if I were to ask the question to each of us, how is your life looking on this earth? What would you say? I don't mean a photograph and how you might look in a picture, but your life. See, our life is really a series of choices, isn't it? And the consequences that come out of those choices. It's like our actions are seeds planted in the ground, and all those seeds bear fruit, and that fruit really becomes our life. Now, we can see a snapshot shot of everyone's life by looking at your timeline on Facebook. We can see where you've been and what you've been doing, but is that really accurate? Does it engulf the whole entirety of your life? You say, well, why is that important? Well, it seems like when people life before they die, or at least at their memorial. And that is certainly the case with two of the great fathers of the children of Israel, Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob. If Abraham, when he dies, it says these are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived, 175 years. Long life, isn't it? Abraham breathed his last and died a ripe old age. But here's what I want you to notice. An old man, that's a blessing, isn't it? But satisfied with life. And he was gathered to his people. I mean, isn't that wonderful to be able to say that I had a good life? Now, in contrast, Jacob, he sowed a lot of seeds of discords, of deceit and lies. And so when he is at the end of his death, here's how he confesses his life to Pharaoh. The years of my sojourning are 130. Few and unpleasant have been the years of my life. And he compares them to the life of his father, Abraham and Isaac. That's sad, isn't it? To say they're few, but mostly it's sad because he says they were unpleasant. Now we look at his life, and it was unpleasant because of a series of choices that he made based on bad information that he was given. So it's good to have you all here. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to have people that have been sick and apart from us, and to have you back part, our brothers and sisters. It's good to have people that are just seeking Christ perhaps for the first time, because we're just trying to build a life that lasts forever. Because wouldn't it be sad in the end that you built this life and then when the storms arrive and blow mightily, that your life ends up being devastated and you realize, I wasted my time on this earth? That's the songs we've been singing about building your house on a rock that's secure so that when those storms do blow, that you will still stand. It's not just a figurative, nice idea. These are the very words of Jesus in Matthew 7. So again, open your iPads, your phones, your Bibles, and I really want you to read along as we look in Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus is going to give us the key to having a life that lasts. And it's in this sermon that is one of his glorious sermons that we call the Sermon on the Mount. It's in chapter 5 and chapter 6, and it goes all the way through chapter 7. If you're reading a red letter Bible, you'll see all those chapters are red, denoting they're the very words of Jesus. But towards the very end of his lesson to these people that are sitting on this hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee, he says in verse 24, therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be compared to a man who built his house upon a rock. Now, right there is the key. It's really quite simple. It's about building a life based on the actions of what you've heard from Jesus. If you hear his teachings, that's not enough. He says, I want you to act on them, and you're going to be blessed. And that's how we have a life that endures and actually passes through this temporary life on this earth into the next. And that's what we're going to see in our simple lesson this morning. But how do we get to that, therefore, in verse 24? To do so, we have to back up all the way to verse 20. My Bible just flipped. Back all the way to verse 13. Because in verse 13 through 23, we're going to see three challenges to being on a path of building a life that lasts. And these three challenges are, there are going to be false paths, there are going to be false teachers, and then there's also going to be false disciples or false Christians. And if we aren't aware of them, it's so easy for us to get caught up in them and not be on the right path, following the right teacher, and truly being a right disciple. So once we define that, then we can look at the key. But I want you to ask yourself, because it's really, this lesson's about me, myself, and what about my life? Where am I going? What path am I on? So let's look at the three challenges, first of all, to building a life that lasts. Notice what he says in chapter 7, verse 13. Enter by the narrow gate, because the gate is wide, and the way is broad that leads to destruction. And many are those who enter it. And the gate is small, and the way is narrow that leads to life. Now there's the first challenge. There's a big wide path, and a lot of people are on it, but there's a narrow, straight path. It's constricted. It's so narrow, this word is, that you're hemmed in like between two walls. You can't go to the right or left. You only can go straight ahead. Who wouldn't want to be on the wider path? Then verse 15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but would inwardly are ravenous wolves. That's a danger. Then thirdly, he says, as was read for in our reading just now, not everyone, verse 21, who says, Lord, Lord, will enter into the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of my Father. Then in verse 22, he says, on the last day, many will say, Lord, Lord, didn't we prophesy in your name? And in your name cast out demons, your name perform many miracles. And here's what the Lord's going to say. I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me. Isn't that the saddest thing you would ever hear at the end of your life? Leave. I don't know you. So let's look at these individually. We'll spend the most time on the false path, then the false disciples, because I think we know intuitively there are false teachers. But he says there's false path. And that means really there's only one correct path. And we're asked by our Lord to make distinctions between all the paths that are offered to us. Now, when you look at this, some might appear to be right, the paths, but they're actually wrong. That's what Jesus is saying, isn't it? And so everyone's on a path. Can you say that? They're on a journey. They just don't know sometimes where they're going if their path is correct. But everyone's on some type of path. Now, in this context, he's talking about people who have some type of religious conviction or faith. They're on a path. And you say, well, what do you mean there's just two paths? It sounds like you just said there's many false paths. Well, this wide path that Jesus talks about, it's so wide, you can believe anything you want. So there's groups on it. They're the monotheists over there, and there's some Hindus over here traveling over here, and there's some Buddhists over here, and they don't converge because they all believe they're on the right path, but they're all on this wide path, and it's leading to where? Destruction. And we live in a society that says, that's kind of intolerant, and it's kind of judgmental. And who are you to make distinctions that there's only one true path, when, after all, we know that all paths lead to heaven, or all paths lead to the top of the mountain. And after all, doesn't Jesus say, thou shalt not judge? Well, it's interesting. You know where Jesus said that? In the Sermon on the Mountain, in this chapter, at the beginning of this chapter, thou shalt not judge. Now, why would Jesus tell you not to judge and then tell you, oh, there's false paths and you need to be a judge of those? He doesn't contradict himself, does he? We'll explain that in a second. But have you ever been in Nevada where there's not good self-service in northern Nevada? And you travel through and there's roads, and we were trying to take back roads, Ann and I, from, the southern part into south central Oregon. And you get up and your GPS doesn't work, so Google Maps don't work, and they don't have signs, and all of a sudden there's rolling hills and there's a fork on the road, and you don't know if you go right or left. And so, since I have perfect keen sense of direction, I always go. If you make a wrong turn, might you have to backtrack a long way when you realize, it's the wrong way? Now, these are paved roads. The worst thing that would happen, you might run out of gas or get a flat tire. But you're probably not going to die. But we all understand the concept. There are a lot of paths, and you don't want to be on all of them because they won't all take you to your goal. There's only one goal, and that's heaven. And there's only one path. So who are you to say that? Oh, I'm nobody. Jesus said there's one. He said, I am the truth. I am the way. I am the life. Now, there are other trails in Oregon. If you've ever been hiking a lot, probably the worst nightmare is when you come to a fork in the trail and there is no phone service and your map doesn't show it and you don't know if I'm supposed to go left or right. How many people have gotten lost in the wilderness because they took the wrong path? Sadly, how many have died because they took the wrong path, ran out of food or water, or took a fall? It happens every year. Choosing the right path is essential in a physical sense. How much more so in spiritual? And you say, well, how are you going to know which is the right path? And you're being kind of intolerant. That's interesting. The only person, think about this, that knows the right path to the top of the mountain is the person that's on the top of the mountain. Can you be at the bottom and say all paths lead there? No, because you haven't traveled all paths. How are you going to make that statement? So a person says, you're being kind of intolerant, saying there's only one path to heaven. Wait a second, you're saying your view is superior to mine, that all paths, as though you've already been there. See what they're doing? They're doing the very thing they're accusing us of doing. They're being intolerant, as though they know better, have a superior viewpoint. Let me suggest the only one knows how to get to heaven is someone that has come down from heaven. And that's Jesus. Now, the Muslims will say, their prophets say they have the only exclusive path. But only Jesus claimed to be God. Only Jesus did the miracles to prove that he was God. Jesus is the only one that's come from heaven and says, I will die in 3 days, I will raise up my body, and did exactly that. Giving unprovable or undoubting proof that he is who he said he was, the Son of God. He knows the path. How are we going to know unless someone from up there tells us? There's just one path. And you got to be careful. And what it would be the saddest thing is if someone sent you on the wrong path. And that leads us to our second point. There's false teachers. Jesus said, watch out. You got to be discerning. Don't just listen to everything that people tell. People teach false truths. Isn't that awesome word? False truths. They teach the gospel that's not true. And they don't know it. They're just repeating what they've heard. Does that make sense? Then there are people that do it intentionally because they're trying to lead people astray. I think Jesus is alluding to that group. But there's lots of false teachers. Now, when you ever are in a big city, and this is before the days of Google Maps, and you had to get your street map out, and where do I turn? She said, turn right. And that's my office. She said, no, win, right. And we get lost. And so you pull over finally to a gas station. This is the old days. They don't even have gas stations where people know where they're going. You say, how do I get to such and such? And they go, well, you go down here to the third line, turn on Kumadama Street, and then you turn left on, and then you try to follow it. And when you get down there, you find out that it wasn't the third light, it was the fifth light, and it wasn't Kumagama Street, it was like something Boulevard. And it's challenging, isn't it, when people are giving you directions? Now, I've always thought of this. It's just the way my mind works, I'm sorry. What if you went up and asked someone at a 7-Eleven, I've stopped and asked people, sometimes just off the sidewalk, hey, you know how to get to blah, 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 and they'll tell you. What if they're telling you the opposite direction? You ever thought of that? It's this way, and they say, go 5 miles this way, turn left, and you'll be right there. And you go, thank you, and you turn around and go that way, and they're going, and they say, well, hey, no one would ever do that. Oh, really? The fact that I could think about it means someone's done it. Isn't that true? And they would laugh, because they know they'll never see you again. There's false teachers out there. And you might get there 5 miles and be mad and turn around to come back. But what if it's the end of your life? You realize you've lived a lie. That'd be the saddest thing. There's no God, and that's a belief system, isn't it? It's a belief system. There is no God, and when you're dead, it's all over, and then you find out different. And everything you've built your life on to that point is destroyed. And that's why Jesus says, get on the right path. Make sure you listen to the right information. I am the truth. He's the right teacher. And I am the way. I am the right path. And I am the life. The third one has to do with more personal reflection. Because here we're looking outward, making sure we're on the right path. Here we're discerning teachers, making sure they're teaching the truth. But here I'd suggest you need to look inward as well as outward. First of all, he says there's many false Christians. And what do you mean by that? He says not everyone, and that's what the text says in verse 21, look, not everyone. Doesn't say not anyone who calls me Lord, Lord. He says not everyone. Now that implies a lot of people profess or confess that Jesus is their Lord. Because it says not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. When you call Jesus Lord, Lord, when you say it double, you're emphasizing it. You're personally my master. That's what that phrase means. He says, not everyone who confesses that I'm their Lord will enter the kingdom of heaven. That's got to be shocking. Now, these people are religious people, or else they wouldn't call him Lord. Is that not correct? And so they've lived a life, they think they're on a path, and Jesus says, I'm not saying this. He says, not everyone will enter the kingdom of heaven. Like, really? He says, but whoever what? Does, isn't that what it says in your text? The will of my Father who's in heaven. Oh, now we're getting a clue to really the key to building a life that lasts. You got to do what you hear. Because when you call Jesus Lord, what are you implying? I'm giving up my life and authority over my life, and I'm bending the knee before you, and I'm exalting you as Lord of my life. I'm your servant, and you are my master. Jesus, in Luke chapter 6, verse 46, says, why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? He sees there's a contradiction in here. Your words say one thing, but your actions deny me. Did you get that? They deny that I'm your Lord, because if I truly was, you'd do what I said. Everything I say. So he says, as he goes on in verse 22, he says, many will say to me on that day. And then he lists some of the things they're going to be doing. Prophesying, cast out demons. Now, there's a big debate whether they think they did them or they actually did them. But the point is, it's going to be on the last day. And what does Jesus say in verse 23? I will say to them, what? Depart. Well, why would you send them away? They've been calling you Lord all their life. Then he says, I never knew you. Not that I knew you for a while and now you've fallen away. I never knew you. Now, it's interesting. That's a denial of that person, isn't it? I don't know you. Jesus said in Matthew 10, whoever confesses me before men, I'll confess before my Father. Yeah, I know that person. Come on in. Did you get that? Then he says in the next verse, whoever denies me, I will deny. Has he just denied this person calling him Lord, Lord? Has he just denied him? Yes. He said, I never knew you. I don't know who you are. Leave. But the person's been confessing Christ all his life. Lord, Lord. How do you put those two together? Words mean nothing. Actions mean so much more than words. They speak so much louder than words. Jesus says, I don't know you because your actions deny me. Did you get that? You denied me, and now I'm denying you. I don't know who you are. But we said, Lord. Doesn't matter. Actions are important. In fact, it's all about acting on what we know to be true. Our life is built by a series of actions. They're like seeds in the ground, and they produce a life, and some will be burned up, and some will last forever. So that's why we want to make sure we're on the right path, listening to the right information, and then doing something about it. And so then we come to his summary in verse 24 and 25. And I joked with Eric about leading this song that we learned in, children's class. The wise man builds his house upon the rock. And we should never be above singing that song because it teaches the very truth of what Jesus is trying to get you to get. Well, how do you build your house upon the rock? As we sang in that one song, The Rock of Ages, some build their life on their reputation. Some build it on their riches. He said, mine is built on the rock that forever stands, the Rock of Ages. How do you do that? So when the storms comes, and you say, well, how important is that? He says, whoever hears the words of mine and acts on them can be compared to a wise man. So if you want to know what a wise man looks like in Christ's eyes, it's someone that hears what he says, then actually does something. So there's the principle. It's simple. It's hear plus act. And of course, James says he is blessed in what he does, not what he thinks about doing, not what he's learned. You're only blessed in what we do. And that's what Jesus is saying here. And so I just gave you an example. Here is a lighthouse. I knew that. Just making sure you're awake. Oh, boy. I can't even get names right in the teen class. Sorry, guys. But lighthouse. And wouldn't it be nice to visit? It looks very pristine. It's off the coast of Spain. It's like less than 100 feet tall. It's got a guest house. Wouldn't you like to stay there? Yeah, you said no. Why? Because it has notorious storms that rise up and waves pound that house. There's been 2 such storms. One swept a lightkeeper away, and he was never found. But when the storm was over, the house stood, the lighthouse. Why? It's built on rock. We understand that principle, don't we? If you build your house without a foundation, when the storms come, it's just going to pick up and float away. Haven't we seen that in floods? House actually is going down the flood rivers. Or they'll get blown away. We see it over and over, and that's why if you're in a floodplain, they won't even sell you, in a lot of instances, flood insurance, because they know it's just not going to stand. Jesus is drawing this analogy because he says, you know it's true. In every walk of life, it's true spiritually. You've got to have a foundation that's firm and build on it, and his word is the rock. Why is it going to always last? Because it's true. It's true today, and then when you get in the storms, it'll still be true, and you stand before the Lord, it'll still be true, and you know that you'll still have done what is right. Now, the worst thing is when you build on a lie. And then you find out you went the wrong direction, and you're at a dead end. Like, why didn't someone tell me? That's why it's important that we listen to the right teachers. Because a lot of people say, well, I know people that don't believe in God or Christianity, but they do good things. Well, I would suggest they borrow it from Christianity. The golden rule comes from Christianity. But wouldn't the most proper thing to do for someone is to tell them the right direction to where to go? Not be the guy that says, no, go this way, you'll be happy. Even if they sincerely believe it because they're telling them a lie. What path are we on? Are we just confessing Christ, or are we actually living for Christ? That's what Jesus is asking here. what kind of foundation are you building on? Because whoever hears, that's part one, these words of mine, but then acts on them. He's a wise man that builds his house on a rock. Now, we'd be amiss if we didn't just bring this full circle. What kind of life choices are you asking me to make, Lord? And we could be quick to say, well, these words of mine means everything he's taught in the Bible. And it's easy to go to things like salvation issues, baptism. But while that's true, Jesus has just ended his lesson we call the Sermon on the Mount. And so while these words of mine would include anything he says, they specifically refer to what he has just said. You with me? So let's go back quickly and evaluate my life as a professing Christian, Lord, Lord, and see if I've heard his words and have I been acting on them. So you go all the way back to chapter 5. And that's where we're just going to do a quick survey on the mountain. Because Jesus challenges his religious people of his day. And they're amazed, as it says at the end, at his words. But notice in chapter 5, he starts with saying that verse 13, you're the salt of the earth. He said, you got to be salty. You got to make a difference in the world around you. Verse 14, you're a light of the world. And so am I living a life that so shines that people can see Christ through me and see that true path? Because that's what he says in verse 16. Let your light shine before men in such a way that when they see your good works, is my life full of good works? Well, what are they? Defined by Christ. That people glorify God. That's a person that is Christian indeed and not just a false one. And so then he goes into a series of commandments that they taught out of the Old Testament. And the first one is, you've heard it said, thou shalt not kill. Well, that's written in, it's commandment number what? 5 or 6. And we read it, and Jesus says, but I say unto you, and he addresses issues of the heart. So I want to deal with them real quickly. Because it's really about the heart. He said, you've heard it said, thou shalt not kill. I say unto you, if you're even angry at your brother, and you wish he were dead, you're guilty of murder already. Wow. These are the words he says, I want you to act on. Well, what do you got to do? He says, before you dare come present a gift at this altar of worship to God, you be reconciled to that brother or that sister. Because you have ill will in your heart. Wow, that's challenging. Now, later in chapter 6, I'm just jumping ahead, when he gives the model prayer, he says, forgive one another as Father's forgiven you, or else forget it, you won't be forgiven at all. What? I got to forgive my enemies? I got to forgive those who have done wrong? That's the only power I have over them. And Jesus says, yes. He who hears these words and acts on them will build a life that stands. So then he talks about, we see in the next, there's building this life. Here's dealing with issues of anger. He goes later in chapter 5, you've heard it said, whoever commits adultery. Well, I say to whoever lusts after a woman commits adultery in her heart. So Jesus' challenge our very core system, what we dwell on, because all sins come from where? The heart. What do you think about? What do you dwell on? He said, I wouldn't physically because the consequences, but I'll sure do it internally. He said, you're just as guilty. So he says, take drastic action. If your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. Now, he's not saying literally, but do whatever it takes to make your life pure. Whoever hears my word and acts on them will be blessed. And he goes on about talking and taking vows. He said, make sure your word's honest. If you give your word, you keep it. Then he said, you've heard an eye for an eye. That was their system of justice. He said, don't you take vengeance. If someone slaps you, what? Turn your cheek, because if you give grace to others, guess what? Grace will be given to you. That's why he says, don't judge. That word means condemn. Like, I wish he was dead. They don't deserve to be alive. When you say that about someone else, what have you just done to yourself? It's easy to pick out other people's sins, right? And say they're unworthy. It's harder to look at our own sins. But when I do not give grace to those who sin, God says you're going to be condemned the same way. If you did not extend grace, you won't receive grace. So he says, here's the drastic action you need to take. Remove that log out of your own eye. If you're perfectly righteous, you never think bad thoughts, you never feel ill will towards others, you always forgive, you turn the cheek, then you can stand on a pedestal and judge others. Who can do that? These are amazing words that challenge what the very concept of a Christian is. Then he gets into chapter 6, acts of righteousness. The Pharisees in their day traditionally would give alms, that's giving. They'd pray, and then they would fast. So Jesus challenges everything they're doing to appear righteous. He says, when you pray, pray not, giving, this first one in chapter 6. When you give alms, do it secretly. Don't let your right hand know what the left hand is doing. So here's what he's saying. You don't give to help yourself. Well, see, they were doing it to be seen by men and get rewards from it. You give to help others. How do you do that? You do it anonymously as best you can. When they were praying these big, beautiful prayers in the street for people could hear them. He says, you don't pray so others will hear you. You pray in your closet so God will hear you. He challenges their whole religious practice. Speaking to what? The heart. Then he says fasting. Fasting was a practice they did religiously. That's a good word. But they would do it publicly, and they would have sackcloth, that'd be like burlap, and they would look, oh, Jack's fasting. He said, no, wash your face, put on clothes so no one knows. Don't you fast so people will think you're spiritual. You fast so you can be more spiritual before God. He didn't say don't do it. He says do it, but do it rightly. Then in chapter 6, he finishes, quit seeking things on this earth, because when it's all done, it's not going to endure. Lay up your treasures where? There are people here. I hate saying it. They're not here today. I'm not talking about those who are sick, that are older, or traveling. There are people that here that are on a different path. They're not here because they're on a different path. Aren't they? And I'm talking about people that know they should be here and know they could be here, but they're on another path because it's more important than building a life that endures. And that's why we plead with him. Don't come to get your name checked off. Come because you're trying to build a life that'll stand the test of time, because the storms will come. They said, stop it. Yeah, have a good life, but make sure your priority is heaven. Then he says, while we're talking about it, quit being anxious about food, shelter, and clothing. Seek first my kingdom, because God, he knows you need these things. So he says, start trusting. See how he challenges us? These are the words that he says. Quit judging. Forgive others. Giving and praying and fasting. Do it correctly. Let your light shine. And that's why in chapter 7 he finishes with what we call the what? The golden rule. And this is the most challenging, because the first priority is whatever you would want someone to do for you, you start doing it for them. You say, wow. Isn't that what Jesus did? We couldn't save ourselves, so he came down and did it for us. And it cost him everything. It's sacrificial. And that's how we know love. He laid his life down for us, so we ought to lay our life down for others. Now, when this is all said, can you look with me and we'll finish at the end of chapter 7. I'm not the master teacher, Jesus is. And if he was the one giving the lesson, I would suggest you would have the same reaction that they did when they heard this 3-chapter long sermon. Their reaction is given to us in chapter 7, verse 28. The result was that when Jesus had finished these words, the multitudes were amazed at his teaching. They were stunned because he spoke to their hearts. Well, he says he was teaching them as one having authority, as one who's come down from heaven that knows the only true path, that knows the only true way, that can give the only true teaching, and challenges us to be authentic and genuine, true disciples. And that's someone that hears and then obeys. So that'd be my parting words. Can we allow ourselves to be amazed? Can we allow ourselves to be amazed by Jesus? And if we are, we're going to follow him as much as we can. So if you're with us, I hope that if there's anything we can do, and you're not a child of God and you need to start down that path, we're here to help you. We're not here to judge anyone, but just share the grace with you that God has shared with us. And if we can help you as a Christian in that walk, any need that you have, as Eric comes forward, shall we stand and sing the songs that's selected? Because there is a great day coming.